Today, we're going to dive into one of history's greatest puzzles. You see, in the 13th century, a group of nomadic tribes from the steppes of Central Asia just exploded onto the world stage. And in doing so, they created the largest single land empire the world has ever known. So in this explainer, we're going to break down exactly how they managed to pull off this incredible feat.
So, the big question here is pretty straightforward, but the answer is anything but. How did they actually do it? I mean, they didn't start out with bigger armies or better technology than anyone else, so what was their secret? Let's walk through the key reasons that made their conquest possible.
To really get your head around the sheer speed and scale of what they did, just look at this comparison. You've got the Roman Empire, right? A total benchmark for power in the ancient world. It took them over 400 years to build. The Mongols, on the other hand, conquered most of their vast territory in just 25 years. That's a single generation. It's that incredible speed that makes their story so fascinating.
Okay, so to really understand their rise, we have to go back to the beginning, where they started. It's the year 1206, and a leader named Temujin, who we now know as Genghis Khan, does something that nobody thought was possible. He unites all the scattered, warring tribes of the Mongolian steppe into a single nation.
And to appreciate that achievement, you have to understand what they didn't have. Before Genghis Khan came along, the Mongols had none of the usual signs of a growing empire. They were split up, always fighting amongst themselves, and they had no major cities, no central government to speak of. By any measure, they were the definition of an underdog.
And yet, from that humble start, they built an empire that covered about 24 million square kilometers. It stretched all the way from the Pacific Ocean to the very heart of Europe. It's just a staggering amount of land, covering a huge portion of the known world at the time.
So, the question remains, how did they get from scattered tribes to a global power? Well, the first part of the answer has to be their completely revolutionary way of fighting a war. They built a military machine that was unlike anything the world had ever seen before.
You can really boil their military dominance down to three core ideas. You could call it their tactical tripod. Each one of these pillars supported the others, and together they created an army that their enemies just couldn't figure out. So let's break them down one by one.
First up, mobility. This was, without a doubt, their biggest advantage. Every single Mongol soldier grew up on horseback and was an expert archer, on horseback. And here's the key. Each warrior would bring several horses with them on campaign. This meant they could switch to a fresh mount and just keep going, covering huge distances at incredible speeds. For their enemies, it felt like the Mongols could appear out of nowhere, strike, and then just vanish before a slower traditional army could do anything about it.
The second pillar was their ranged attack. The Mongol composite bow was honestly a technological marvel. It was small, light, but incredibly powerful and accurate. This weapon allowed their horse archers to completely control the battlefield. They could ride circles around an enemy army, showering them with arrows from a safe distance, often breaking their formations before any close quarters fighting even started.
And finally, their tactics. They were just incredibly smart. They were masters of psychological warfare right there on the battlefield. Their most famous trick was the feigned retreat. They'd pretend to run away, which would trick their enemies into a messy, overconfident chase. And just when the enemy line was broken and disorganized, the Mongols would turn around and spring a perfectly laid trap. They turned orderly battles into pure chaos, and in that chaos, they were the masters.
But here's the thing. It wasn't just about being good on the battlefield. You don't build an empire this massive with military skill alone. The Mongols' real genius was in their strategies that went way beyond combat. Things like psychology, organization, and a really remarkable ability to learn and adapt.
One of their most powerful weapons was pure psychology. The deal they offered to cities and kingdoms in their path was brutally simple. You could surrender and your city would be spared. You'd be integrated into the Mongol Empire. Or you could resist, and if you resisted, you'd face total destruction. This wasn't just mindless cruelty, it was a cold, calculated strategy. The stories of cities that were wiped off the map served as a terrifying warning to the next city down the road, making surrender a much more attractive option.
Okay, but this brings up a really obvious question, right? The Mongols were masters of fighting in the open plains, but empires are built around giant, fortified cities with huge walls. How could an army of horsemen possibly conquer those?
The answer is really simple, but it's maybe the most important part of this whole story. They learned.
And this ability to adapt was their true secret weapon. When the Mongols came up against a problem they couldn't solve with horses and bows, like a giant wall, they didn't give up. They absorbed the knowledge of the people they conquered. They'd capture Chinese and Persian engineers, the best in the world,
and have them build advanced siege weapons like catapults and trebuchets. They were constantly learning, constantly evolving.
And internally, their army was built for pure effectiveness. In a lot of other armies at the time, your rank was based on who your father was. But the Mongol military was a meritocracy. The best, most talented leaders rose to the top, period. It didn't matter if you were born a noble or a commoner. This made their officer corps incredibly competent, disciplined, and loyal.
Now, to get the full picture, we can't just talk about how strong the Mongols were. We also have to look at the weaknesses of the empires they were up against. Because in many ways, the Mongols arrived in a world that was almost ready to be conquered.
What you had was just a total mismatch in the very idea of warfare. The big, established empires in China, Persia, and Europe, they all relied on these slow, infantry-heavy armies that were completely dependent on long, vulnerable supply lines. The Mongols were the exact opposite. Fast, flexible, and able to live off the land. It was a clash of two different eras of warfare, and the old way just couldn't keep up.
On top of that, the political world was a mess. The Mongols never had to face one massive unified enemy. The great civilizations of the day were all divided. China was split into several rival dynasties. The Islamic world was fragmented into competing caliphates, and Eastern Europe was a patchwork of disorganized kingdoms. This lack of unity meant the Mongols could pick their enemies off one by one.
So, what's the big takeaway from this incredible piece of history? Well, the story of the Mongol Empire actually gives us some timeless lessons about power, strategy, and what it really takes to change the world.
Lesson number 1 is pretty clear. A better strategy will almost always beat bigger numbers. The Mongols were frequently outnumbered in their most important battles, but they won because they fought smarter. They proved that how you fight is way more important than how many you are.
And the second big lesson? Adaptability is everything. You could argue that the Mongols' greatest weapon wasn't their bow or their horse. It was their open-minded willingness to learn, to change their tactics, and to adopt new ideas from anyone, even their conquered enemies. Their ability to evolve was what made them unstoppable.
And that really brings us to the core of it all. The Mongols' strength wasn't just in their ability to fight. It was in their fundamental understanding of warfare itself. They didn't just play the game better than everyone else, they changed the rules of the game entirely. And that shows us that true power isn't always about having more resources, but about having a new way of thinking that can render the old ways obsolete.